game development loop Spellcasting 101
Why is it
for
turning on?
indie game devs. My name is Vidhvat. I'm making my own like indie games. That's where I started. This was before the whole mobile boom happened. I did make some mobile games as well, but like I never got on the gravy train. Like a lot of people at the time actually did go into like mobile games and then it was like. But yeah. So I just stuck to like my high school project and I just continued working on that. And straight out of college, I made this little game called Lovely Planet, which is a first-person shooter. You can play it on Steam. It was also published on Xbox and PlayStation. And that spawned a bunch of other Lovely Planet games, which I made for the following decade. So most of them are first-person shooters, except this one over there that's called Super Lovely Planet, and that one is a third-person platformer. So all of the stuff that I'm going to be sharing with you today is mostly like all the experience that I had from working on these games. I've held a couple of jobs in the mobile game industry, in crypto, whatever. That's like irrelevant, so we're not going to talk about that. Like every time you're talking about like how did you get your success or this or that. So I just want to like preface this talk is going to be a little bit more meta in its nature. The target audience is more of like if you're working in indie, if you're working on like your own creative ideas. I don't think there are any business people in this room, so this is more like a creative kind of thing.
Should I go? No.
But basically, like if you're looking for like how to make money off of indie games, I'm probably the wrong person to ask. This is more about like the creative endeavor, and this is quite recent. I've never given this talk before. I'm super excited about sharing these ideas with you, so I hope you take away something from this. This is where every game starts, right? Wait, let me fix that. There you go. Right? So you have an idea, right? This is like the source of the inspiration. This is where like you're wide-eyed about this thing that's in your head, and it's usually like some grandiose kind of idea of like I want to take this game and I want to add these elements to it. So this is basically like your source of drive, and you kind of like give into it, and you arrive at the next stage, which is execution, right? Like this is where like okay, now I have to build this thing. It's in my head. It's gotta come out, and I mean company. Sit down, you start working on it, and then you run into difficulties. So if you're a beginner, maybe you're struggling with the tools like the programming, or maybe you're an artist and you're like concepting stuff and it's all really good, but like you don't know where to go from there. You kind of like get stuck, and like sometimes you say that I'm not good enough, and that's foreshadowing for later. What happens to all of us if you kind of like recover from there? You go back, right? Like it comes back. You can't let that idea get out of your head, and you kind of give into it again. But this time, because this is the second iteration of the thing, you're going to do it a little bit differently, right? Like, I mean, just the basics of it, you're not going to repeat the same mistakes again. So maybe you have the idea of like cloning GTA, or you wanted to make a massively multiplayer online game for your first, endeavor. You're like, okay, maybe I won't do that, right? Because like I did it before and it didn't work. So like a little bit of your experience from executing on the idea kind of like feeds back into the idea itself. So you kind of like know going into it what's going to work and what's not going to work, but you have like a faint idea of it. And that's what makes the execution very different. Like the second time you go into it, say you're a beginner, you know more programming, right? You're an artist beginning, you know how pixel art works and how it doesn't work. Like that sort of the thing is obviously like different when you go into it, but what doesn't happen this time is like you're not like completely lost, right? You have some idea of where you're going, and if you're doing it right, you'll probably reach this stage, which is again a very important stage. You get to a prototype, you get to a playable, right? And somebody even actually plays your game. Like if this is the first time you're doing it as a game developer, trust me, it's one of those like milestones that you cross, because like after that it's just like you've done the thing. You actually made the game, somebody's playing it. Even though it's not like a complete product, even though it's not like a crazy success, at least someone's playing it. And I think that's one of the really important milestones that you gotta cross that hurdle. But what happens again, right? I know it's getting repetitive, but there's a meta message here. The crash, right? The crash happens, and this time it's like, okay, the game is not fun, right? Like you made it actually, you didn't really just like struggle and stop. This time you actually made something, and there's lots of reasons why this happens. Maybe you spend too much time doing it, and now you're just like, oh my god, it's just like a vertical slice of the game took me like 7 months. Like, how am I going to like finish this game? So it's like very intimidating, and you lose motivation because it's just there's still too much friction in the process. Just a side note here, you can see like there is a little pattern going on here where you're just doing the same thing over and over again. This is very like personal to me because I've actually done this many times, and I wanted to share it with you because I think there is some wisdom behind this process, and that's what we're trying to get to over here. So stick with me, right? You had a crash. What do? You get a job in finance. I mean, what do you do, right? Like, trust me, I'm not making any jokes. I actually did it. I got a job in crypto. But you know what happens? I tell you what happens. You go to work on Wednesday. It's like a random day of the week, really, and you're just sitting at your desk and you have some, to-do list, and then you know what comes back to you? Damn straight. It's haunting you at this point, right? But here's the thing. So now that we've done it many times, let's just say that you went through that process many times. Now I'm gonna try to describe you so it doesn't get boring. What it looks like after you've done it like way too many times. So right, like this is not just like experience. This is more like a wisdom thing, right? So let me just quickly walk you through this. This time when you get the idea, you won't be that excited about it. Like you will still be pretty interested in kind of like, but you won't have that hit of the rush of the idea because you'll be like, look, man, I've done this like 20 times before. You have that kind of attitude going in, but that's actually helping you because you have less kind of like, the childlike enthusiasm, but more kind of like, you're smart about it. And what happens is that your idea in your head is not just like this thing that you're trying to grasp, but it'll be like this kind of structured thing where you'll know what parts of it will just work because you've done it so many times before, and then the other half of it will just be like red flags on the map. You'll be like, I don't know about these things, but I'm really confident about these parts, right? And that kind of structure will give you like a lot of confidence going into it, and you will go into it. And when you go into it, you will be kind of like, you have this like attack list. Like you know what needs to be put into place, and you'll know what's the stuff that you're kind of exploring or you're kind of doubtful about. And if you're a programmer, you'll relate with this where, even the work that you're doing as a programmer, like you're putting stuff down which you're sure of, and you're just going to program it once, it's going to be solid and robust. The rest of the code base will be like this wild west where you're just like, look, I know this stuff will change, so I'm just like throwing stuff together to kind of like, half the project is like a prototype, half of it is like, this is just solid stuff. It's like the fortress, right? That kind of stuff starts happening, and then what part, like it's like a living code base almost, like it's sentient. It's telling you like, here's the stuff that you have to do, here's the stuff that's done, right? And it's all beautiful, and you feel like you have a superpower, but then it's different though this time. You can see like, you see it's like, I saw it coming. It's because, so I'll tell you how it's different. It's because you had an idea of what parts of it were not going to work, right? So when it comes to you, it's just like I know what I'm doing, right? And also because the process was so much more smooth, you don't spend 7 months this time, for example, right? Like you know that you wanted to explore those things, and that could be like a speed bump or like a complete like, oh my god, my project is like going sideways here. So you kind of like accelerate towards that part of the project and kind of explore everything you need to explore. And this time you do it in like a month or two, right? So you don't burn that much time. So when this thing, if it happens, it's not gonna like hit you the same way. It won't be like a punch in the face. It'll be like a little kind of like jab, and you'll be like, okay, you know what, that's fine. So just to bring it all together, you start with an idea, you execute on it, you have the crash. So like there's this like trifecta, right? And like the thesis of my talk here, the theory, like that's the post, right? The theory is that this is all actually happening at the same time, and you cannot be doing any one of these things in isolation, really. So the idea, it's best to treat it as this thing that is like the source of motivation. It's like your drive. It's the thing that's making you do the stuff, right? You have the idea, you execute on it, and we discussed how like those two kind of like start informing each other over time. And then as you're executing it, you arrive at this place where it's like a bump. And that inspiration that was driving you kind of goes away, right? Because you're like, I did all the things that the idea told me to do, and then I arrived at a point where I have no idea what to do next. And you kind of lose that motivation, right? So if this is the process that you're stuck in all the time, right? The point is to not lose that motivation. I think that's how you kind of like get to the next iteration of the process. And honestly, that's probably just all you're doing all the time, right? The idea by itself is not its own thing because the work reveals itself as you go. This is, by the way, the quote is from Rick Rubin's book, the creative act, which I highly recommend if you're doing anything creative. That stuff is just priceless. And what you do once you've executed on the idea and you've kind of learned more about it, you go into the crash, but this time you're kind of like chasing after it. This time you're kind of like wanting the crash to happen because you know that this is going to like complete the cycle. This is what's going to like bring it all together. And this quote also I like very much. It says like, failure is the information you need to know to get where you're going. And that is where I think the process kind of like makes like a full cycle, and then you can kind of like go at it again. So I really love this picture. And I think like if you really had to distill the idea even down further, like you know how I told you about like the motivation comes in, you execute on it, and then there's like the valve is loose, and like you just lose the motivation. You kind of have to realize that you have to like just keep the process going. The game that you're making, the idea is not yours. The game that you're making is like a byproduct of a process that you're kind of employing and you're kind of repeating. So it's like the side effect is the game. You want to just make sure that the process that you're doing it really well, right? The game will just happen. So you just maintain the headspace. And I wanted to keep going. There is like a next phase, and if anyone's interested, and if you have time, you can ask me about it. But I really think that if you keep doing this, you'll arrive at a point where you start working on your game in a way where ideas will start falling into place, and you have like no way to like logically explain what's really going on. And I think that people who actually like follow their inspiration in a very intuitive way are able to kind of arrive at this place where they're just flowing with their project, and they don't really have to think about how like, oh, here's the part of my idea that I'm confident about, here's the parts which are kind of like iffy. Their intuition just tells them what to do, and that's when you've kind of like become one with the process, and you've like turned into a different thing. We'll just skip this. Last slide, really. No, I really like this movie. Like, if you have to take anything away from the stuff, the whole motivation, whatever idea process, always stay in the mindset of just solving problems. Okay, like just don't think about your idea. It's not yours. In itself, like you're really not getting anything out of it. You're only after you execute on it will the idea reveal itself to you. So you always want to be in that motion. And sometimes you will hit a speed bump. Don't get swayed by it. Sometimes when I'm working on my projects this year, I've been prototyping like 4 different games. I finally arrived at something that I'm confident about, but there were many opportunities on the road where I could just been like, dude, I've been working on this for like 4 months and this is like nothing, nobody likes it, I can just throw it away. Or if your mind is in the right place, you can just be like, okay, I'll take this, and this from all my prototypes. I'm gonna put it together, I'm gonna try this other thing. Right? Like it's really just all happening in your head. Trust me, I know this. I'm not really confident about it. So really that's just it. That's what my dog. You're stuck in a spiral. There's really just no way out of it. The only thing you can do is just like go through it. And that's it.